Hello everybody and welcome to episode 66 of Competitive Magic with the Karnies. I'm your host from Italy, Andrea Mengucci, and joining me as always we have Javier Dominguez from Spain.
Hello everyone.
And Anthony Lee from Australia.
Hola.
The Karnies are back and we have a special episode for you today. Well, actually, Javier doesn't know about this, doesn't know about the topic. Me and Anthony plotted it in the dark while waiting for you, Javier. Hear us out.
Okay.
So today, actually, I caught Anthony in my stream while I was kind of like brainstorming blue-red Murktide lists. And I was like, wait a second, what if, we do it later today on the podcast? Both Anthony and Javier today, you guys help me kind of go through my testing process for the upcoming regional championship because, well, I would say that I'm lost. I thought I wanted to play coffers, after the 30 minutes of coffer talk last week. Unfortunately, the event this weekend didn't really go well for it. But mostly what happened was that Blue-Red Murktide did so well this weekend that I asked myself, why I'm not playing it. Blue-Red Murktide won the 2 qualifiers. It won the mocks by Gracias por tanto. Congratulations, Mauro Sasso, for this very good achievement. And I'm like, maybe I should play Murktide, but there's a lot of differences in the list, and I want to know you guys' opinion. So what do you say, Javier?
Well, first of all, Anthony, are you okay?
Yeah, I don't really like hate Murktide or anything. I just haven't thought it was a great choice for most of the time that Mengu has thought it might be good. But it's hard to argue with the burden of results here, and also, I think it might be fun for viewers because I know, like a lot of the time before big events, certainly you and I we have other obligations to teammates to not talk too much about what we're thinking about stuff coming up. But Mengu has no such reservations, and he's happy to share what's on his mind with his audience, right? So I think it'd be kind of fun to actually look into what we're thinking about, what one of us might actually play at an event. And what we're thinking about it, like look a bit into that process. I don't know, I think it'll be good. I'm kind of looking forward to it.
Well, first of all, you said you don't hate Murktide. I mean, it's literally like you hate Murktide to the degree where it has become a meme in different Discord groups. So I don't know. Are you really okay? Is it like Mengu plotting? Or
I love a good plot. I don't know. It makes sense to me.
All right. So just run into a Murktide special. Okay, let's go. Yeah. All right, I'm in.
Okay, so the two biggest differences of Murktide lists these days are the presence of Ledger Shredder or not. So we see the first qualifier on Sunday was won by Soulstrong, which is a nickname that you might remember, Javier. Remember when you were playing Grixis Shadow back in the days? This was definitely a player that had a dominant success with that deck, and he's playing 0 copies of Shredder. A thing that I really like from Soulstrong list, and he got adopted in the next Murktide list that did well, were the 2 Fib of the Mirror Breaker in the sideboard. This is something to go just have an extra tool against Scam. The other version that we see is the one that Mauro Sasso used to win the mocks with 3 copies of Shredder, 3 copies of Channeler, and I actually watched his run. He went undefeated with Murktide in the mocks, and he cited out Channeler a lot. He cited it out against Yugmoth, he cited it out against Scam, so he clearly thinks that the card maybe is just not that good against those matchups, and he thinks that Shredder is very important there. To give, again, more examples, we have the list from Marcio Calvario, who top-8 the showcase last week. He had 2 Shredder. We have the list from Mental Misstep. That's Stefan Schultz, who has done very well with Murktide recently, and he has 1 Shredder. So, it's kind of like numbers for everyone. 0, 1, 2, 3. I played 4 at the LMS in Barcelona last month, so I think the number of Ledger Shredder is definitely the most important thing when it comes to Murktide deck building, and so I wanted to hear your opinions on the matter.
Okay, I mean, this is definitely a rather complicated question. I mean, first of all, disclaimer: my knowledge of this archetype is limited. Like, this is not a deck where I'm like the most proficient at. But that said, I don't think the question is exactly like how many shatters you want to play. It's just like a matter of metagame, right? First, you have to establish how heavy Murktide is going to be in a metagame, not only because you have to care about the mirror matches, but also because you have to calibrate how... I guess the question is how important your opponents will think Murktide is, I guess, because one thing about DRC and Shredder, they have this tension where DRC is presumably a better card in a vacuum in this deck, but it's also worse, especially against dynamics like post-cyborg cards, right? People attacking your graveyard, for example. But Shredder, on the other hand, it's a little bit worse in terms of like a game one card, but it's much better against those like graveyard interaction, like hers, or even Agatha Soul's Cauldron, Voidwalker. All these cards are very annoying for Murktide, and Shredder is pretty good against them, and also is a good tool in the mirror match. So I think that could be the first thing to do. Like, I could see a player playing 0 Shredders 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, but now this weekend playing 2, or the other way around, depending on how they perceive the metagame. So that's where I will try to make the evaluations mostly. But also, on top of this, you also have to map the sideboard, because the more DRCs you play, the more slots you need to play against the most important decks in the format. Like, so you're playing against Yawmoth, you do not want to have any DRC after sideboard, so you need more cards for Yawmoth, right? Cards that you are able to sideboard in. Like, if you play more Shredders, you can have more like kind of random cards that are narrow but very good against specific decks, like more Blood Moon effect. Like, if you play more Shredders, you can play more Blood Moon effects, presumably, right? And that's also something you have to take into account. Like, I don't think it is a matter of Shredder versus DRC, but just a matter of how your whole deck is built, how you build your perceived metagame, and which cyber cards you want to put for that metagame. Like, I think you make these questions, have these answers, and then instead of answering the question, you answer all the other questions, and once you do that, you will be able to tell how many Shredders you can play, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like, you're not really... Like, you're not saying it's a question of how good Shredder is in general, but that we have to instead set the questions as to tell us how good it will be, right? So the first thing is that I think it's somewhat important that you distinguish that how good however many Shredders were last week may not necessarily be the right number of Shredders going forward. Those are slightly different things. So in this particular case, the fact that Murktide is more popular now you would expect it to be more popular now, would suggest that maybe we want more Shredders, because you then go on to say that Shredder is, it's good in the mirrors, and its value in the deck is correlated to how much Murktide is expected, right? But I think also in general, like, I think it's true I very much agree with what you say, that Shredder is a more flexible card than Dragon's Rage Channeler, and so it opens up more options in your sideboard. So if we look at Dragon's Rage Channeler as like a somewhat more linear card than just Shredder, because it keys off specific synergies in your deck, it also makes your sideboarding less flexible. And I think that's just true for deck construction in general. I think that's something that we've thought about before in terms of how we construct our sideboards. Like, the more narrow cards we play, they kind of have to be offset by increasingly broad cards to make sure that we can present a functional deck post-board in most matchups. But it does extend to the main deck as well, of course, right? Like, if Dragon's Rage Channel needs to be sided out more, we need to be able to bring in more cards, and that means we need to play broader cards, which implies less powerful ones, because presumably there's a trade-off between cards that are more narrow and powerful in specific matchups, and more broad but can come in more matchups. So I think that's a very good way of putting it. I'm just trying to relate that back to general principles. But yeah, I very much agree with what Javier said there.
Yeah.
So metagame wise, if we look at the kind of expected metagame of what's going to happen at the RC, I think there are the most popular decks at the RC will be Crushing Footfalls, Rack the Scam, and Yawmoth and Blue Red Murktide. I think that these 4 decks are going to be the most popular one, in the sense of like actual, people playing against you.
Okay, Murktide's not that far. I mean, sorry,
the best choices.
Amulet's not so far behind though, right? Can we make the cutoff there? Maybe, I don't know.
I think that Amulet is going to be definitely popular, but like I think it's gonna be the fifth number, but I think there's gonna be like, how do you say? Like I wouldn't build my main deck to beat Amulet.
Okay.
This is what I wanted to say.
Okay. So that's the
I
cutoff.
have a thing to add here. This is something we have talked before, but 12% footfalls is actually less than double of 6% Amulet, for example, because deck difficulty and win rate the deck has, etc. So I will actually construct my deck assuming these 5 decks are most equal. I mean, Reno's the most important, but I think this 7.3 Amulet is like, I will round it up to like an 8% in terms of like actual impact, because it's a deck of like, people play the deck will actually have a decent win rate because you don't pick Amulet and never played it before, so, which is the, I think I will round down Rhinos to 11 and Amulet up to 8.
Okay.
Based on like this metagame.
Basically you're saying that the win percentage of Rhinos and Hammer and Murktide always being around like 50% makes them less popular. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I'm not saying this. Okay, like when I'm saying a whole different thing, and it's about like how to approach metagame guessing on metagame impact. Like I don't really care that much about how many decks are played, right? To illustrate, to show this, let's put an example, okay? Let's imagine a deck that has a 20% win rate, like it's a very bad deck. And let's imagine it's played by a 20% of the people, right? Well, if you go to a tournament, you will definitely not count this 20% of the deck that loses every time, almost, than a 20% of a deck that actually wins often, right? Like that's kind of obvious, isn't it?
I understand. So you're saying that the high presence of decks that don't have a very good win rate, it feels like they're smaller in the metagame, mostly because like they lose earlier.
Yeah, kind of.
Like
what I'm saying is, the more difficult or the more win rate the deck has, you should probably round up a little bit when trying to make metagame prediction, and the other way around. Yes.
Yeah. So is this what it's called, the winner's metagame?
Well, I don't exactly like that concept. It's ish, but it's not exactly this, because it's not an A or B situation. It's about like the impact of the metagame that I care about. It's like an X value, and this X value is not based on a yes or no situation. It's like, it's a matter of weights. So I will weight more or less. So it's same concept, but actually a little bit more refined, I will say.
Yeah, it's similar.
Okay, yeah.
But he's not only weighting like how strong the deck is in the abstract, but he's also trying to account for a selection bias where inexperienced players are more likely to select footfalls, which is not to say that every player selecting footfalls is inexperienced, and as recent results can suggest to us, that is very much not the case. But that inexperienced players do choose that more often, and inexperienced players will naturally choose to play Amulet less often, and that will drag up the effective win rate of Amulet. So that is why he is wanting to weight it more heavily than the raw play percentage would suggest. And I think that's particularly important for longer events, like these 2 days RCs. Like these longer events like RCs or at least RCs in Europe and the US are not the same as, for example, RCQs, right? Where that winner's metagame effect doesn't have enough rounds to come into play. But when we're looking at events like the RC that you're preparing for, then I think Javier's approach is very much, it very much makes sense to me that you need to account for these things. So I think maybe we should look at these top 5, maybe.
I will at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the share the screen I'm sharing on these YouTube videos with you, it's some stats. Ever since there was a change recently on the Magical Line stats, and Magical Line is releasing all of the deck list. So from 1st to 300th, you're gonna have all the deck list, which means that you're gonna have the meta share, and like there's a lot more data going around, and this person Anail Yahi is making it all together and definitely helping us here talking about these numbers more precisely, because it really feels like these 5 decks are the most popular / best decks. So to me, at least, like when I made my power ranking, this is what I expected to see, and it's nice to see a confirmation of from the datas. So basically, looking at this thing and what you just said, these 5 decks are the ones that you should try and build your deck and sideboard for. Like, you should try to have a precise plan against those 5 decks. You should try and test against those decks, right?
Yeah, I think it's like I will not consider it acceptable going to the tournament without an actual plan against those decks. Like it's fine to not have a plan against, Merfolk or Meal or any other decks, but these five you need to have a plan and you need to have test the matchups if you're gonna, especially if you're gonna play a deck like Murktide where, you need to interact and you need to sideboard tightly.
Agreed.
Yeah, exactly. So let's return to the main topic of this, what we wanted to do, which was kind of like the Ledger Shredder positioning, right? Because again, I think that is, I don't want to say that's the key, but I think that's going to be very important, like how many Ledger Shredder you want to play. So a problem that Murktide has, and one of the main use of Ledger Shredder, is to fight the Leland of the Void coming out from Rack the Scam. For example, I used to be a big hater of Leland of the Void against Murktide because, Murktide in the past used to play 3 or even 4 Ledger Shredder, so whenever they had Leland against me, I felt like, whatever, I just, loot away the Murktide and I was siding out Channeler, which is again what Gracias por Tanto did in the MOX. It in fact beat a couple of Rack the Scam on its way. But obviously, like Ledger Shredder, it's not a great card against just a deck with, Fatal Push or Orcish Bowmaster, whereas you want to be all in on Murk that region to draw 4 Murk that region. You win game 1. If they don't draw Leland of the Void in the post-Cyber games, you win one of the 2 post-Cyber games with that. So I think that's a very important, key point of Ledger Shredder. And yeah, this is again, looking at these top 5 decks, you're happy to have Ledger Shredder against Footfalls? Yes, for sure. Against Murktide? Yes, for sure. Against Amulet? No, for sure. But how good it is against these Scam Yugmoth thing, and is it only because Leland of the Void?
Well, but you can also, if you want to look at it that way, you can also say if you play Shredder, you're not playing as many cards. You could play a bunch of Fable of Mirror Breakers, right, to try to achieve this against a Scam. If you,
exactly, that's what.
If you do this, then you could. I'm saying Leland of the Void out of Scam specifically should not be, and it's not enough to justify playing Shredders, because you can play Fables, or you can play whatever card you think is good against a Scam, and I'm pretty sure you can find a better card on Shredder against specifically Scam if you're going to have one in the sideboard, right? I think you need more reasons to play Shredders. If that's the reason to play Shredder, I will say not play Shredder. I think you need more. Definitely way more.
Yeah, I think it's probably more about how effective your hate cards against linear decks can be. Looping back to what we talked about before, where Shredder perhaps being more flexible as a card or more resilient in the face of hate means that you can free up a little bit of sideboard space to play more effective hate cards. Then I think that might be also a very important factor in deciding how many copies of that card you decide to play. If you think that the metagame is defined enough that you can decide to play narrow hate cards, and that you think that those hate cards available are effective enough to significantly swing your matchup, then the card becomes more appealing, I think. So that's kind of how I would frame your consideration, I think, as to whether...
Well, it actually might be describing this. I think, looking at this number, I feel like this Modern is as condensed as it has ever been. Yes. I mean, not ever, but it's pretty condensed for Modern. Modern used to be the classic, I played 16 rounds and I played 12 different archetypes.
Not anymore.
I don't think that's gonna be the case now, and that means card like Curse Totem actually, makes sense. I mean, if you play Shredder and because of that you save 1 cyber slot that you can just throw, being a Curse Totem, you're gonna be happy when you're playing against Yawmoth, right? And I think you just described the situation where that's good. My first instinct will be yeah, I mean the metagame is very condensed, so I actually want to play 10s. I want to play Magus of the Moons and Curse Totems and Flash Storms and Explosives. I don't even want to play Chalice of the Void. I want to play the best cards against Rhinos, best card against any of these decks. And I think that's... we're looking now at Soulstrong sideboard, and that's pretty much the approach. But I think we could also... It's tricky, but I think the sideboard is built like this, right? All these cards are actual... Most of them are just 10s.
More than before, I think. I think that before that used to be a little bit the case, but that's because decks were... they went along certain lines, and... So I think now, before you had stuff like Stony Silences or Rest in Pieces that hit large swaths of the metagame, but now I think it's just that the metagame is condensed enough that you can have one deck in mind and be I want this card in this one matchup, And in the past, in Modern, that might have been a dubious proposition, but I think it's totally reasonable now. Like, I think now you can say, I think that this deck will be popular and I will play this card for it. The metagame shares are just larger now in Modern than they used to be. So I think that's
like they're very unique.
Yes.
The cards, I mean, like Explosives is pretty much all against rhinos. You can cyborg it against like Scales or Hammer, but it's like you're putting them because they beat rhinos, right? And the same with Curse Totem. I'm sure you can find some other decks where it's good, but it's still the same, right? Like, but this, okay, if we assume this is true, we're gonna build the cyborg like this. I mean, look at the disputes. It played one dispute. Like before, disputes were often like a 2, 3, or 4 off or whatever, right? Like it's just how the cyborgs are built now. And this actually means it's kind of not. This means we should be more inclined to play some shadows, right? Because we'll have less Brazen Borrowers. Like when I think of flexible cards you can sideboard in many matchups, I just think of a Brazen Borrower. Like I will even go and say, this is the Brazen Borrower card. Like, like the more cards you need to sideboard in a flexible way in any format where blue and borrowers are legal, that's definitely a thing to do. So the starting point will be like, well, the metagame is condensed enough, so we probably want some amount of shredders in our deck will be the starting, I think.
The way I would frame it, I suppose, after having this discussion is that because the metagame in Modern is condensed to a degree that we have generally not seen before other than in exceptional circumstances, that I would like our main deck to be as flexible as possible in order to facilitate having as powerful a sideboard as possible, because I think these are things that we often have to balance, flexibility against power, and instead of trying to balance the sideboard against itself in that regard, I would try to balance the main deck against the sideboard in that regard. So I want to play more generic and flexible cards that I can consistently submit in across matchups and pre and post board main deck, so that I can afford to have as many of the hammers in the sideboard as I can. That's how I think I would be trying to approach building Murktide, and I think any fair deck in Modern right now.
Yeah, I actually agree. For example, I'm looking now at Mauro's sideboard. I think Brotherhood Sand actually does not fit this, right? Like it's a card that's not a 10 against the most played decks, is it? Like I don't know how good it is against Yawgmoth, but I'm pretty sure it's not a 10. Like you can surely do better than that. And this is the type of card that used to be very good in Modern because it will catch up against a lot of decks and the metagame will be very spread. I don't think this is the case anymore. I will expect this to not be the kind of card we will ideally have in our sideboard, as opposed to, a second copy of Curse Totem, for example, sitting in the sideboard. That's how I will start building the sideboard. Which is, by the way, how I will actually start building my Murktide deck on this situation.
His Brotherhood End is very weird to me, because if you look at the top 5 decks, well, there's no decks where you love it against, but I've seen it, Mauro sideboarding this card against Scam and against Yawgmoth. In particular, it's very well paired with Ledger Shredder. There was a spot where Mauro had a Ledger Shredder, and he went like Subtlety, Brotherhood End, killed 4 creatures and kept his Shredder, which was, an interesting play, I would say, but one
that's good.
Felt,
don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's a bad card. Like I will actually sideboard in against those decks. But if I'm gonna play against those decks, I maybe will prefer to have like different cards. Like I still think some amount of these cards will be needed, like these dress down type of cards, Brotherhood Sand, like maybe 1 or 2 total or something, just to make sure the numbers fit. But I think this card is not powerful enough to be playing 2 copies when it's not very good against the top 5 decks. Honestly, the way I will be my sideboard is just like think of the top 5 decks and ignore the rest completely and just, hope that I have enough. And not hope, I will actually check, but try to figure out a way for it to work for the rest of the matchups. Like I don't want to put a single card to beat Hammer, I want my deck to be okay against Hammer, like by accident, if you want to put it that way. Because I want my deck for sure to be better against the top 5 decks. Like those are the ones I care about a lot. And I think cards that are not 10s or 9s in any of the top 5 matchups, I will just not. I mean, I will go like 1 or 2 just because you can sideboard a card in against multiple of those decks, which could be Brotherhood Sand, could be maybe other cards. I don't know. But I will definitely not play more than 1 or 2 of the cards where they are not a 10 in any of the 5 matchups. That's how I feel about this. I don't know if Anthony agrees.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is generally reflective of, I think, Modern having a much more clearly defined tier 1 a top tier a set of top tier decks than it generally has, and it kind of reminds me of a lesson that I don't know if you guys remember the streamer Day9. He used to do a lot of StarCraft, right? And I think I remember one lesson that he spoke about that stuck with me. I stuck with him explaining, just go kill him. I think there might have been some profanity included, but the gist of it was just go kill him. And the idea was that if your opponent's doing something weird, don't get too far in the weeds in terms of like trying to counter it specifically. Just go kill him, because the whole thing about their strategy being weird is that they're trying to catch you off guard. But if you're just doing something powerful and proactive, I mean, your strategy is by default stronger than theirs. That's why your thing is, a top tier strategy and theirs isn't, and they're trying to catch you off guard. So just make sure that you're proactive and strong. And I think that kind of applies to the difference between the best decks in Modern right now and the ones that are below them. Like, if you don't really need to have super targeted answers to win those matchups, because your deck just operates on a more powerful level than those decks in general, which is what defines the difference between these decks and the rest, these top 5 and the rest, I think. So I think that to me tells me why, like, I don't really want to have narrow cards. I just don't need them. I care way more about the top decks, and I would like to have the edge there, and I can rely on the inherent power of these top 5 decks against the rest, I think.
Yeah, that is one of the good things of playing a proactive deck, and it was something that I always suggest people, is, playing a proactive deck is overall, especially in an important tournament like the regional champ, better than playing a reactive deck, because if you're building your deck to beat the top 5 decks, which, I made the math, I counted those numbers, and it made 51%, which is, obviously just half of the metagame, but it's not that the other 50% you will have no shot. You'll still be a very good deck with a very, very good proactive deck. So even if you don't have the, the Pithing Needle against Mono Green Tron, or the second Dress Down against Hammer Time, you can still, win those matchups just because, you have a very strong deck with a very good proactive plan. So that's definitely the appeal of playing something like Murktide over something like Coffers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I think it was interesting, and I think that I will, after what you said and everything, I think I will definitely have some number of shredders. I was already, I don't know if you know this, but I love the card Ledger Shredder, and I always played at least a couple of them in my Murktide decks. Again, last time in Barcelona, I went up to 4. I have really liked the list that Marcio played at this showcase, and it's kind of what I wanted to go for. I don't know what you think about this list, Javier. Marcy was playing the Mental Misstep tech of Change the Equation, which basically serves as a 5th counterspell. Counterspell is very good right now in Modern. If you look at these decks, Counterspell is just a fantastic card right now against all these decks. I would say that Counterspell used to be bad against the very fast decks, or something like, Hammer Time, or just maybe, it's mostly that one. Outside of that, having a 5th Change the Equation might actually make you even better against these rhinos and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like how this deck looks, but then again, this is what Marcio played last week. Doesn't mean that this will be what Marcio will play now. And that's something like, just don't get attached too much to a list that was very good, but things still change. And I like where this is going, but I think, for example, like second dress, I don't think there's enough decks to justify 2 dress downs, for example. That's something I will not like to be doing. Like, there's a lot of small things. I will definitely play the first Course Totem. I think the card is like, it's the 10, like, I think the card is too good to not play some copies at least. Like, there's some small things, I think. I think the sideboard could be a little bit tighter, but by the way, Stern Sculling is a card that's just apparently one of the best ones to play around, because it doubles. Okay, so now we're going to talk about something else. Like, we want 10s, but a card that's also an 8 against 2 different decks, that's also very good. Like, Stern Sculling counters, I think, Grease, Jalmoth for 1 mana, but also counters the Scram creatures. That's That's maybe a 9 in 2 decks, right? That's also a card I am very interested in. And
Yeah, so
that's
if you look at Stern Scolding, it's really only bad against Footfalls. Because against Amulet, it has a lot of targets. Against Murktide, it has... I mean, it's worse than Spellsnare, but still, I wouldn't mind having... I wouldn't side him out, the Stern Scolding.
I think, I mean, looking at Marshall's list, I assume he doesn't think that, because otherwise he will probably play the main deck, I feel. Like, I think Stern Scolding has a lot of matchups where it's okay, but it's not a card you actually want to have post-sideboard. Like, it's not dead. Like, you play against Scoffers, the card's not dead, right? Because you can counter an Orc, but it doesn't mean the card's good. It just means it's less bad to main deck. Speaking of which, by the way, I feel like having cards like Shredder also lets you get away a little bit more with cards like the Stern Scolding for for looting reasons. Like, I don't want to overdo this, the classic, like, yeah, I can put bad cards in my deck because I have Fable, but it's also not good to ignore it, right? Like, it is, I think, like, you can be a little bit more flexible with those things, not only because of that, but also because when in the matchup of the top 5 where Scolding is worse, it's the one where Shredder is arguably better. Like, Shredder is the best against Rhinos, right? So that's a little bit of a way where you can compensate. So it's not only because you can discard it, but also because Shredder's good when Scolding is dead. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
One final question I have for you, and what do you think about Questing Druid in Blue-Red Murktide? Because if I see the metagame correctly, Questing Druid is good against Scam and Murktide. It's bad against Rhinos, Amulet Titan, and against Yawgmoth. Like, at the end of the day, it's very similar to Shredder, I think. But the Questing Druid against Murktide and Scam, it makes a big difference. Like, it's a grindy card, and those matchup is all about like drawing more expressive iteration than your opponent. So I would say that this may be a good moment to play Questing Druid. This doesn't mean that in 2 weeks will be a good moment, but I think that looking at the last qualifiers where Scam and Murktide were everywhere, I felt like it may be a good time for Questing Druid. Like, what do you think about this card, and what do you think about how does look compared to just having some subtlety, some shredders, some more cards over this Questing Druid slots?
Well, I mean, the first thing that's coming to my mind is that you already answered the question where you showed 5 decks and said it was bad against 2, good against 2, and medium against 1. This probably means there's not too many reasons to actually, put a color into the deck. But more importantly, like, this is not a yes-no situation. Like, cards are not only good or bad. It's a matter of how good they are compared to how bad they are. Like, I think just turning things into yes-no actually can can open like some blind spots where we actually not like 2 goods can be less important than 1 bad, or the other way around. So for here, my first thought is, while I can see why this card is definitely decent against Murktide, but for example, I don't think the gap between Shredder and Questing Druid can be this large, because Shredder's actually very good, and like, you cannot get that much better than the actual best threat for the mirror, especially against dynamics like hers and the such. But I can see why Druid is actually much better against a Scam than Shredder is. I'm just saying, like, this is not a way of, like, I don't think this too good too bad is like that good of a way of saying it. My concern with Druid will be like, Rhinos is the best, like, it's a most played deck. You could even go and say it's the best deck, and I could see Questing Druid being like unacceptably worse than Shredder, because Shredder is very strong against Rhinos. Like, it puts them in positions where they cannot really attack unless you they combo twice or whatever. Questing Druid seems underwhelming there. Like, that matchup is not about like grinding forever. It's more about like sticking a threat they cannot deal with and just close the game fast or prison them with counter spells. And I think, for me personally speaking, I think that Questing Druid seems too bad compared to Shredder for this to be the case. Also, it's not that good to put like 1 or 2 off Questing Druids, but you still pay the cost on the breeding pool. Like, you have 1 less basic island, which means You have a little bit worse moon effects, which can affect, all these kind of things actually matter against the rest of the field. So I will say no, because I think Shredder is too much better than Question Druid against Rhinos, but I could be wrong. And also, if a Scam becomes the most played deck by a lot or something, then maybe it's good again. I don't know what Anthony thinks.
Yeah, I think all of that is true. And the other thing that's like kind of like throwing me a little bit out Question Druid is that I feel like you need to make more changes than just like plugging out and plugging in for Questing Druids, Like, I feel like this card is explicitly a threat, so you're actually changing the balance of how your deck works. And so I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, because you're probably not just cutting all threats for Questing Druids. Like, it also changes like how you'll sideboard and whatnot as well, because it may be more or less flexible. Like, if you want to take them against Rhinos, for example, then we start to lose the effect that we talked about before, where Ledger Shredder afforded us more hate cards. I'm not sure if Questing Druid does that. I mean, Questing Druid does work better with specific ones. Like, for example, I kind of, it's kind of nice if you can flip a Chalice off it or something that's very effective. But yeah, I feel like Questing Druid might disrupt the balance of the deck, in addition to what Javier had mentioned before. I just don't know if you need this many threats in general. And I somewhat think that it might make sense to play Questing Druid. I think the best argument for Questing Druid is that if you're playing Murktide, it's because you think it's good, and that presumably that it's good because it attacks Scam, which is going to be likely a very popular deck. But, and then, I mean, that's why I would play Murktide, right? Like, I would play Murktide if I thought there was going to be Scam on the rise. And so playing Questing Druid matches with that logic, but in terms of the other decks, I agree that the Druid seems a little lacking to me. And I think that probably outweighs that effect. But that to me is the case with Questing Druid. I'm not saying that I think that case is correct, because I don't, but that's what I think the case is. That the logic of playing Questing Druid lines up with the logic of playing Murktide.
So I think that in the mirror match, Questing Druid is significantly better than Shredder, because sometimes Shredder just simply dies to a bolt. Like, it really is that easy. Like, they play Shredder, and, sure, they gotta draw this card, but it dies to removal, whereas Questing Druid can become a 3-for-1 easily. And I say easily for real, like, you have, card selection and etc. So against Murktide, I think the difference is big. And against Rhinos, the difference is also big. Like in Sofia, where I played this deck, I lost to Rhinos twice with the Questing Druid, whereas with Ledger Shredder, it's just much harder to lose to Rhinos, I would say. So I would say that that's a very good point, and you saying that you expect Footfalls to be the most popular deck makes sense to me, that, we should just stick to Izzet rather than just go ahead and splash a color to be worse against the most popular deck.
But it is good to identify the case in which we would want Questing Druid. So like I said, like if maybe something changes, then maybe you could consider the Questing Druid. Like we say, Questing Druid makes sense if we think there's going to be a lot more Black, Red, and Murktide. Then if that looks like that's going to be the case, you can make that change pretty easily, right? Like you don't really have to rehash all of that. Like, if I think the metagame is going to look like this, I'm going to play Questing Druid. And, it would not be that hard to see a case in which Rhinos might be less popular than Scam or Murktide, right? Like, we just have to see perhaps a big weekend for Rhinos might lead to a resurgence in hate and then a drop-off in Rhinos. That's quite foreseeable, right? I think Modern often works in that way. You have to think a couple steps ahead.
Yeah, Rhinos.
So, yeah, I mean...
Rhinos did very well this weekend.
Yeah.
Very, very well. All the non-PTQ events, the challenges were dominated by Rhinos. And,
absolutely. So, yeah, I'm just saying that, what we're saying now, we're talking about the next step, but it's very possible that Questing Druid might actually be good in the next step. So let's recognize that possibility. And so if you're preparing for your RC, you might want to think about that as well, I think.
Yeah, if Rhinos go down, I will definitely consider playing the Questing Druid.
Yeah, Rhinos won all 4 challenges and came second twice of those challenges. Murktide won the 2 qualifier. Qualifier usually a little bit bigger than the challenges, but still, like, that's, still like over 100 people each almost. So again, Rhinos and Murktide are definitely this weekend were the 2 most successful decks.
Okay.
Not most popular.
And the RC is a few weeks from now, right? Is it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Sorry.
Yeah, the RC is not this weekend, the one after.
Okay, so what we might have to consider is that, it's not far, that's true. Maybe, I guess that's why we're having this episode, huh? So, you can consider perhaps an effect where the massive success of Rhinos leads to a massive surge in hate this weekend, and then the following weekend, people will be less likely to bring rhinos, right? That might be possible. I don't know how reactive modern metagames are in paper specifically, because I know on Magic Online that's what I would expect, certainly. And I think there must be that effect to some degree. In paper, especially with these RCs that are becoming increasingly competitive with, the prizes are pretty good. I think, I think that's what you have to think about. How fast do you expect the metagame to react? Because certainly the results that you just told us about rhinos, they they certainly warrant a response from people, I assume. So let's think about how we might react to that, I would say.
Yeah, I remember seeing a tweet of that said that rhinos won all 4 challenges. Amalia won all 3 challenges in Pioneer. Again, we're not gonna focus on Pioneer because of the upcoming Pro Tour, but there is definitely some signals this weekend from the Magic Online challenges. I think that there was a lot of Murktide and modern content in general. How about we go over something that happened over to Standard, which is still the RCQ format. I saw, a lot of tweets, especially coming from the United States, of like RCQ in America this past weekend.
Oh, it seems to be.
So we can make Anthony happy. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't mind that talk. I enjoyed it. It was a little more the speed that we like. Yeah, I think.
Let us know in the comment if you enjoyed the talk and
if us
going in depths.
Yeah, that we did a bit more of a dive than cover the news, I suppose. And there's a place for everything, and I enjoyed doing that. In terms of Standard, it seems to be doing well. I mean, I saw someone mention that they played a 78 player Standard RCQ the other day, and I thought, wow, that's. That sounded unthinkable a little while ago, didn't it? But it seems to be going off, and it seems to be doing very well on Magic Online as well, huh? So it's something that should clearly not be a surprise to anybody who's followed Standard. Looks like Mogged won another one. Kind of wild. This guy won
every week.
This weekend alone. He had 2 wins and a top 8, and one of the wins was in Standard. I mentioned before that Mogged's win rate was especially high because he plays a lot of Standard where he can achieve a particularly high win rate, and well, he is living up to that very much so. But this time he's gone back to Esper. Like, he's been bouncing around a little bit before. You might have remembered before last season, he tried some different things to react, right? Like, people, I think he did very well with Esper. Everybody moved to Esper, then he switched to White-Black, which was the worst deck in the abstract, but it was a lot better against Esper, which he knew everybody would switch to. And then he did something very similar recently where he switched to Blue-Black, where, everybody would have expected him to play Esper. But now he's gone back to the default. And why might that be?
Well, I mean, I will expect you, the Standard expert, to actually tell us.
Well, I mean, I'm just throwing it out
go
there.
ahead.
Because I actually kind of think, Standard's kind of like Murktide, right? Like, Javier, you said you weren't a Murktide expert, but I really think Murktide tests a lot of fundamental skills and understandings more than it does like a specific, deck-specific knowledge, And so I expect I expected you to have very good insight there, and you did, and I expect the same thing of Standard, even if you haven't played much Standard recently. Your fundamentals should...
Okay. I can tell you why I think he went through this. So basically, I think the deck that you jump into a ship like Esper, where you do not have like a strong feeling of a specific direction, and at least the direction not being heavily skewed towards domain. Right? We saw the domain decks being over the top, and we saw like some decks being like quite some extreme adaptations. But now, going into this weekend, it will be like a split between like Esper, mid-range decks, the Karnies decks, some under-the-radar decks, but also domain, right? Like, it will be a more spread win rate, a metagame, which means you actually want to play the more well-rounded deck, like the one with less holes, like less vulnerabilities, just trying to rely on the sideboards to have a good plan. And that's why I will expect to be the reason to play Esper. Like, I think Esper was a good deck for this weekend, but... yeah, I mean, that's what I think.
Yeah, like, I think that's just the converse. Like, I think that's exactly right, because it's the converse of what I was just saying that Mogged had done last season, right? Like, when Mogged saw a very clear direction for the metagame, he's like, everyone's going to play Esper, so I'm going to play White-Black that's better against Esper. Then he played, like, a specific version that was weaker jumping, but better against the metagame. But when the metagame is more uncertain, he just goes with the kind of stockish version, right? So he just plays, like, a deck that's generically good. I think that's absolutely it. He just wasn't sure. He didn't have like a strong read on the metagame or thought that it would be diffused, which definitely seems to be the case. There's a lot of different decks in Standard right now. It's a little bit tricky to keep track of it all, but we'll do our best.
I like it, and I like that they are actually like different for real. Because sometimes you have like, Esped mid-range, Sultai mid-range, and Mardu mid-range, but they're just like all basically the same in a macro level way where they're just like different piles doing the same thing. But here, the standard is like, well, they're actually like very different decks, like Domain and Marred and the Toxic deck, and Esper. They don't play anything like similar to each other. I think
they're very distinct. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a very good format, honestly.
It's kind of unreal, yeah. It's kind of fantasy story stuff.
Did you see, Anthony, that Golgari midrange is still there? The deck that you top
still battling along, and, yeah.
And now it's playing a 2 more playset, because I remember that you said something on your deck tag that was like you only played 1 4-off, which was Mosswood Dread Knight, because every other card wasn't as good. But now you have Deep Cavern Bat and Sentinel of the Nameless City that are 4-offs.
Yeah, these cards are just like absolutely. They're just absolutely massive inclusions. I'm actually not 100% sure about Deep Cavern Bat right now. I think it's a great inclusion, but like it actually doesn't stack super well, because although it does have significant upsides over, like if you look at cards like that in the past, like Pilfer or whatever, they were not great, and like expensive discards are a little awkward. And Golgari, unlike the other decks that play Deep Cavern Bat, doesn't have as good ways to exploit the fact that it's a creature, right? So like, for example, you have Esper, and then being a creature is awesome because you have Virtue of Loyalty, you have Rafine, so like a 2-drop evasive attacker is naturally excellent in that deck. And then the Rakdos decks try to use Gix to achieve a similar effect, but Golgari just doesn't have a thing like that. So the Deep Cavern Bat is actually a little bit worse in Golgari than it is elsewhere. So maybe I'm not sure that one is actually a flaw of, even though it is like a fairly strong card, so you could see playing for that reason. I just think it's less synergistic than it is elsewhere. The Sentinel of the Nameless City is just super impressive. Like, when I play with that card, I'm like, wow, this is finally another 4-off we can play after Mosswood Dread Knight, because the card is actually just that good. It's just very solid in all the matchups, very flexible. I think that's a clear winner for the 3-drop slot in the same way that Mosswood Dread Knight was a clear winner in the 2-drop slot. So that's not too surprising to see, yeah. I like this. This build.
It looks like Sentinel is actually the only payoff for Bat. Like, once you play 4 Sentinels, playing Bats actually is not that bad.
Yeah, it's
right?
a little
like,
better.
This is the payoff.
Because you put counters.
Yeah, like it's a very good body to put a counter. I mean, not very good because it dies,
well,
but like it's
kind of, yeah. Like, also, I often want to put my maps on the other things.
Isn't lifelink important for Preacher of the Schism? Like, if you're higher life than your opponent,
Kinda.
you make more 1/1s.
Always. Like, sometimes it's actually a drawback. Like, sometimes I don't attack with my bat if I have Preacher, because, like, I don't... Like, if we're on the same life total, it's better.
What do you mean?
Like, if I'm on 20 and you're on 20, I would rather that than me on 21, you're on 19, because then I get both triggers when I attack with the Preacher.
Oh.
So, like, it's not...
I understand.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it comes up. But I that's not a big deal. Like, the Preacher is just, like, a solid card anyway, but...
Wait, so, let me get this Preacher right. If you have more life, you draw cards.
Yeah.
If your opponent has less life, you make a 1/1. If you're both on 20, you'd get both.
Yeah. You might... Yeah, I think you've spoken about
so,
it.
yeah, life...
But, yeah.
Okay, so lifelink is not necessarily important for...
I mean,
it's not always good.
Yeah, it's just not always. It's not a given.
You want to be even lives. You ideally have the same amount of life. I assume sometimes you just take one with one over wasters.
Yes, it does happen. Or like you pass with it up.
Yeah. The mana burn style, like it was like in the 90s.
It's really cool.
Bam!
So this first Saturday challenge with 8 different archetypes. In the first place, there's Mono Red, which was the deck that our friend said he played at his RCQ.
Danielakos and Mocked, running the race.
Still just destroying it. I don't know, man.
Again. Yeah.
I don't know. Do you not find that kind of like... I want to stop short of calling it inspirational, but it is very encouraging that like the same players can just keep bringing down the same results. Like you look at like, especially in Standard, but also even in other formats. Like you kind of see this in Pauper as well, where they're just like that one dude who just wins everything. And then like in Modern, you do see the same name pop up more often. Like we mentioned, players with higher win rates in Modern. Yeah, Standard, just the same people win, and like you're like, man, I can just be better and win more. And it's kind of validating. I think that's really cool. I just love seeing
Mog did something insane. He double queued Standard and Pauper and won both. And like a lot of people, double queue, but usually you play worse, right?
Yeah.
This is just, and also the decks that he played are not like mono red. He played like Esper in standard, and he played like Dimir Terror in Pauper.
He has to be playing so
Which-
fast. like Pauper, every Pauper game and most
Yeah.
standard games just takes so long. Like he has to be playing like
Yeah.
lightning fast. That's even more. I didn't even know he
Yeah,
double
yeah.
queued them. And wow,
Yeah.
Yeah.
this guy.
I think it tweeted that. But yeah, it says this is my teammate for the PT. He's qualified to Chicago. He won the Sunday PTQ on
Awesome.
the last PT.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. We
Yeah.
watched him. Yeah, we watched him
Yeah.
win. Yeah, and our other.
Yeah, he played against your teammate, I think, in the last round.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you brought up that your
Um,
teammate beat our teammate. Okay, I see how it is, Mengu. Jeez.
Okay,
alright.
okay, we will save
Jeez,
this
dude.
for the next time it happens the other way around.
No,
Yeah.
I just
Yeah, okay,
I just said
okay.
that to remind you. Yeah, okay. He also shout out to the vintage to the two vintage top 8s. But yeah, so congrats definitely to Mogd and the whole standard format, the people who get to enjoy these formats. I built my standard deck, but unfortunately, I don't know. Hopefully, I'll find an RCQ to play in. But so far,
It'll be fun.
no luck. But
Promise.
hopefully, no. I mean, I just hope they fire. Hope they start.
Yeah, it seems-
They're
soon,
fighting here. They're fighting with
It
people.
seems very
They're 40,
regional.
whatever.
Yeah, but Barcelona. Yeah, Barcelona is like super big. Where I live, it's they had modern, but
Look,
yeah. But anyway, it's very fun to watch these decks, definitely, and talk about it. That's for sure. So this weekend, guys, is there any event that you are excited to play, or just some more Pioneer testing for you?
Well, I will definitely run the Vintage Showcase Challenge with whatever deck I decide 10 minutes before without any kind of testing.
Is there a Vintage and Legacy showcase?
Yeah, Legacy I might actually play it as well, but it's gonna be
Okay.
longer. It depends on the rest. But the Vintage one I'm definitely gonna run it out. Just I like it too much to not try. It's also often fast, so
okay, Boomer.
Yeah.
I mean, Anthony,
Yeah, today-
let us play some Vintage. What about you, Mengu?
No.
Oh, today I have a very cool thing happening. I'm gonna go to the office where we have set up the whole, Mengu's workshop. Actually, we started it all yesterday. We did the recording, super happy with the games, and then we went over to it, and the microphones weren't properly set up.
Ah.
So
That's a classic,
it'll
though.
go,
But-
right?
it'll go wasted. I feel so bad.
Hey,
But,
I mean,
hopefully-
hey, it just means you're gonna play a little bit more Magic than you thought you were going to. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. I mean, it's not great that the previous you don't get to use, but maybe you'll do an even better job this time. You don't know that until you do it.
Exactly.
Might be better.
That's the hope.
That's
That's
positive,
the hope, so,
Anthony.
yeah.
Therefore, you all listeners, it's a rare side,
Ooh.
but
Ugh.
it's.
Just saying what I think.
The hope is definitely there. Yeah, so I'm gonna actually. How about we? Do you guys have anything else to share with the listeners, or do you think we can?
I think we're good to
find
go, and I'm just wondering which deck you will find to, tell us to talk about for Modern for the RC next week. That's something I'm wondering now.
Hmm?
Yeah, so on Friday I want to go to FNM, and then I'll probably play the whole afternoon against a friend of mine on Rhinos. I think I want to try Questing Droid, so I want to test against him a lot on Questing Droid versus Team of Rhinos, and that's gonna be, I think, an important testing, because if I pass that testing, that means that maybe Questing Droid is okay. So I will keep you updated on that.
Alrighty.
And with that, thank you so much for listening. Before we go, I wanted to remind you that you can support the Karnies podcast on Patreon, patreon.com/Karnies. We have 2 new members, Cameron and Asia. Thank you guys, and hope you are enjoying the Discord, the Discord tweet, the Discord posts. That is definitely something you can visit.
Yeah, cheers, guys.
That's it.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you for
Adios.
listening. Bye bye.
Cheers.